Even if you are in a really bad situation right now, with or without diabetes, but, well, my heart clearly speaks to those who are, who do live with diabetes, there's always a way to find what works for you. It doesn't have to be the same as works for me, absolutely not. It can't be the same as works for your neighbor, or your friend, or your dog, or whatever. You have to find what works for you.
Welcome to the Living Wild podcast. I'm Brent Philbin, and today I am here with Hanna Boëthius. And I still don't know that I'm pronouncing that 100% correctly, but she is on the show and became part of the Wild Tribe while we were at KetoCon and ended up agreeing to come on the show all the way from Switzerland. So this was a pretty cool interview. She is an expert in all things keto or diabetes and runs her own conferences. So learn about Hanna, her story, where she is now, what she's doing, and whether or not she feels like taking any cruises anytime soon on this episode of the Living Wild podcast. All right, once again, welcome to Living Wild podcast. I am here with Hanna Boëthius, who I had to look up that name to pronounce it so that I didn't get it wrong. You are basically an expert on everything diabetes. You're a coach, writer, speaker, all of that. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. This is an incredible honor to be here with you today.
Incredible honor. That's the first one of those that I've heard in the last couple of months. But thanks for that. Anyway, yeah. So we're here on the Living Wild podcast, and we talk everything related to real food, health, and all of that stuff. So you're going to fit right in. And your basic focus is diabetes, correct?
Yes, it is.
How did that become your primary focus for what you were doing?
Well, I am a patient myself, and that's why. You know, if you solve a problem for yourself, then you can solve it for other people, right?
Okay.
So I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was 2 years old. So that was a while ago, 34 years ago this year. And then basically people who got diagnosed with diabetes got the same absolutely atrocious advice as they get today. You know, eat loads of carbs, don't eat any fat, you might just die on the spot. You know, you should have pieces of fruit for dessert, which is, you know, fine if you can handle it. But as a type 1 diabetic, of course, you do not have the ability to actually process any carbs at all without insulin. And you have to add insulin for the rest of your life, no matter how clean eating you go. It's just that you can manage it a lot easier when you don't add a lot of sugar and starches and carbs to the whole thing, and a lot of the quite familiar frankenfoods that we have around today.
So the difference between type 1 and type 2 diabetes is kind of, in my understanding, it's you're born with type 1 and type 2 you develop over the course of life, but I'm sure there's more nuanced differences there.
There's a little bit more to it, yeah. I mean, I was 2, as I said, when I was diagnosed, and that was basically no one else in my family has it. It can't be genetic in my case, so it was something else that triggered it. Basically, it told something that triggered it, told my wonderful immune system to look a little bit closer at the insulin producing cells in my body and go like, oh no, we don't like those guys, we're gonna wipe them out. That's the short version. And so that's why people with type 1 diabetes have to add insulin from the outside, whether that is through a syringe or an insulin pump or a pen or whatever else method they choose to for the rest of their lives. Type 2, on the other hand, can also be hereditary. Both of them can be, but that is a lot more sort of based on lifestyle choices, so to say. So that is usually developed more sort of in older ages. But now we're seeing type 2 cases in kids as young as 2-3 years old, and type 1 cases in people as old as 50, 60. So, I mean, the lines are very, very blurred at this point.
Interesting. Okay, I hadn't considered that somebody that was that old could get it, but I do see we see it younger and younger because we have made
worse and worse
poor
food.
choices with our diets. Yeah, especially I don't know what the I don't know what it's like in Switzerland, but we have a acronym for it here that we use in the Living Wild podcast all the time called SAD, which is the standard American diet. And it's pretty awful. I mean, you can see me, the listeners can't. I'm a big guy. I was definitely a huge product of this. Since I've moved to Austin, I think I'm down 50 pounds or something like that.
Awesome. Well done.
Yeah, thanks. But I believe I was on that track to heading towards a diabetic process. So
yeah, it happens surprisingly quickly.
Yeah, I think
for some people,
for every time I went to the doctor, they kind of did a double take. They would look again, always run my blood sugar, and they'd be like, I feel like this guy should be a diabetic, but he's not. And every time they felt that way, I was like, okay, I need to change something. I need to fix this so that I don't become a cautionary tale. So that's good. When I came to Austin, Colin is the CEO of Wild Foods, and I've been his friend for a long time. When I came back here, he kind of got on me and helped me fix that a little bit.
Awesome. So, that's what friends are for, right?
But yeah, friend is a tough term for him because he yells at you all the time and stuff. So if I had though, let's say I was here today and I had just gotten diagnosed with type 2 diabetes and I was a brand new person. This happened last week, and I happened to be talking to you. What would be the primary piece of advice that you would give me to just start my journey of trying to fix this problem?
Number one, go low carb. Mm-hmm. That's it. That is the key to blood sugar management, because as a person with diabetes, or then hypothetically have diabetes, it is, of course, you have the problem of that you can't process carbs in your body. So why add them when they're not essential to the body? There are essential amino acids, proteins. There are essential fatty acids, fat sources, but there are no essential carbs or sugar. So why add that to the mix and make everything worse than you have to? So that's my number one tip.
So would you recommend some sort of a strict keto, or just kind of getting rid of the carbs? Could I eat all the cheese I want, or, dairy products, or would I be more careful?
Well, it depends on your tolerance, of course, and what your body feels good doing. And I mean, I myself didn't start on strict keto straight away 11 years ago. Not at all, because I was completely alone and I was really scared. And, there's the whole thing with the ketones for type 1 diabetic, because it's commonly misunderstood that it leads straight to ketoacidosis, which is a deadly condition, of course, in type 1 diabetics, because that means that your body is not getting the insulin that it needs. And that's very, very dangerous. Anyway, but I started basically going step by step. So from a SAD diet, it's the same everywhere nowadays, right? So from a SAD diet, I went to
just another product of America. We're helping people out in the world.
America.
Great legacy. Okay.
No, I went to first I went to a liberal paleo sort of approach. So I still had all the fruits, and I still had all the sort of even dried fruits and a bit of honey and all this stuff. And then I started realizing, as soon as I took away the gluten from my diet, that holy wow, this is doing miracles with my blood sugar levels. And so then I started, what else can I remove? How can I feel better yet? And again, and all these mini goals sort of things that then led me to now 11 years later, yes, being on a very strict ketogenic diet. But it doesn't have to be like that for everyone. It depends on who you are and what your preference is and how you want to do it. But definitely get rid of as many carbs as you want and have to, rather. And then take it step by step if you have to. And that's not really a problem. It doesn't have to be from one day to another to go from SAD to keto. It can also take a couple of time in between there.
So you're a coach, and does your coaching tend to be towards this area of transitioning from SAD to something else?
There's been a lot of that, definitely. But there's also a lot of other lifestyle factors that are involved in diabetes care that aren't directly maybe related to the food, but sort of come with being interested in your own health. So that's things like stress reduction, for example, is a huge one, because that really messes with your blood sugars, whether you want it or not, and insulin resistance. That is just one of those things that are really messing you up. And then, for example, getting on the right supplements and movement and how often and how much and of what makes you happy, moving your body, all that stuff. Proper hydration. Are there any medications that need just a bit of like tweaking or changing maybe, or maybe you don't even need them anymore? That of course has to be done in talking with your healthcare provider, as I'm not a medical professional, so I can't give any medical advice, but there is of course a lot that can be done with that as well. And I'm the one that basically gives you the ideas to change your lifestyle, and sadly you will have to do it yourself.
That's true. You can only help people so far. So
Exactly.
do you advocate like a slow, very gradual approach? Like would you say maybe, hey, start eating perfectly keto 1 day a week, 2 day a week, or do you kind of start people in a different process?
It depends on who they are and what their personality is like. If they're really motivated, and for example, like in your example, that I was just diagnosed, last week, and I'm super excited, to get a handle on this, then I'm like, well, go from one day to another, enjoy, Here is what you need to eat, here is what you don't need to eat, go. But if it is someone who is a bit more unsure and, not maybe can't really make up their mind if this is something for them, I'm like, well, maybe it turns out it isn't, but then at least you've tried. And that is sort of my absolute biggest mission, that every single diabetic should know that eating a low carb, real food, clean diet is an option. And you don't have to follow the sort of the old ADA rules of SAD dieting as a diabetic. Anyway.
Yeah, the fat is bad. Yeah, that's a cute one that we've heard, that people still throw that around.
I know, even to newly diagnosed people, which is the saddest thing I can even imagine. Haha, by the way, but the saddest thing I can imagine. But then I would actually rather transition people in terms of meal of the day. So sort of from tomorrow, all your breakfasts are low carb, real food. And then when the breakfast is sort of worked in, then, we take the lunch, and then we take sort of the dinner, and then, all of that stuff. And then in the end, it's a long process, but then in the end, you have a full sort of low carb, real food, clean eating sort of concept that's going to make you feel fantastic in comparison. Or you can also do, of course, by food group. So I, for example, started with removing gluten from my diet because as type 1 is an autoimmune disease, gluten and autoimmunity don't go great together. And so I started with that, and then I took all the other grains, and then, step by step, all the root vegetables and fruits and other sugars and blah, 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 until I got to really clean eating.
So do you usually ask the coach, I want to say patients, but I guess clients would be more appropriate. Yeah, we're not medical professionals. We just went over that. Do you ask them to do any intermittent fasting, or would that actually be counterintuitive to what you're trying to do? Or
I wouldn't do that at first. It also depends on where they are. Have they already started with something like low carb, real food way of eating? Then absolutely, it's a great tool in your toolbox. I intermittent fast every day. I never have breakfast. So in the fancy term, I'm doing a 16-8 every day, but it's just because I'm not hungry in the morning, and I don't feel like I need to stress my body with more food if I'm not hungry. I'm like every dietitian's nightmare. But I can live with it. It's cool.
Well, people often start with kind of the skip breakfast for intermittent fasting. And then, like you said, they realize eventually they're just not hungry during those in-between periods. So it sounds so scary until it actually happens. And then once it does, then it's not so bad.
Exactly. But you do realize, like, I realized when I started fasting, it actually, for me, it's more of a mind game. Like, I'm used to eating at this point of time. Mm-hmm. But then I had to really check in with my body. And that is another huge thing that I talk about, that, you really have to dare to listen to your body. And not a lot of people do, actually, which is kind of weird and scary, that how far we've gotten away from listening to what our bodies are telling us. But anyway, so for me, it was really a mind game that, can I really not eat breakfast and still be okay? Or can I really just go a whole day without eating and still be okay? It was more like that, rather than my body didn't need more energy, more food, more nutrients. Not really. But it was my mind that needed the sort of action of eating.
It's interesting how our mind kind of gets involved with what we're eating and how we're eating it, because there's times where I will eat when I'm not hungry and barely even know that I'm eating. Like if there's a bag of potato chips there or something like that, and I'm just going crazy.
Classic.
Or there's times when my body will tell me I'm ridiculously hungry, but all I needed to do was drink water. Yeah. And I can't really tell the difference as far as what I need when I'm just like, no, I'm hungry. But, once I've had a glass of water, I'm like, oh, no, I'm good. I was just thirsty. Why did that go a different way? So that's an interesting thing. So going a little bit past what you're doing with your coaching clients and your research on diabetes and keto, there are two other pieces of your puzzle that I mentioned, which was that you were a writer and you were a speaker.
Yes.
We just got back from a conference called Low Carb USA.
Oh, yeah. Awesome.
Maybe last week. Have you been to any of the similar low carb / maybe Paleo FX conferences in the US?
Well, I actually spoke at KetoCon in Austin this past June.
We were there too.
Yeah.
Wait, is that where you met Marcy?
Yes.
Oh, cool. Okay. That makes perfect sense. Yeah, we had our little booth there at
exactly. That was awesome. No, but I mean, I love the big American sort of conferences. They're so un-European that it's refreshing.
Wait, what do you mean? What is un-European compared to?
No, it's just, it's just so big and so many people and so many exhibitors and so many speakers. And the ones here are like, well, I do happen to organize an event in Europe myself, which I'm sure I will get to a little bit later. But, it's just smaller, and it's just like, yeah, there's a lot less to do, but there's a lot more focus on maybe a few issues rather than all the issues at hand.
KetoCon is pretty big. At Low Carb USA, it was quite small comparatively. So KetoCon, you had that big floor with the huge expo with all the booths everywhere. And Low Carb USA was focused more on the speaking, the keynotes, and that kind of thing. And they had a small expo, maybe 14, 15 different vendors at that expo, and it all fit in one room. So they're a little bit different, but that conference is cool. I definitely would suggest looking at Paleo FX. It's also in Austin and
same place,
right around the same time. Yeah, it's pretty cool. I like it here. I just moved here pretty recently, so
that's awesome. Yeah, I actually did think about that. If I could spend a bit of time in the US, where would I do it? And Austin was pretty high on the list. It's true.
Austin is cool. There's plenty of places that you shouldn't spend your time if you come to the U.S. where I don't know, they might be something. For me, it's weird. I'm probably going to get some flack for this. I shouldn't even say it, but like New York, for instance, not my thing at all. I didn't like it. There were way too many people. Everything was way too expensive and is way too packed into like little areas. So when I went out to a restaurant, we were looking at like, I'm sitting like next to a bunch of people, completely packed. It was nuts. I remember specifically this restaurant I went to, they had to pull the tables out to let you go sit at the booth and then push the table back in because it was too close to the other tables. So anyway, random tangent. Sorry, I'm really bad at those. We are here talking about what you're doing, your things, and you just said something that we skipped over, said we come back to it. I'm ready to come back to it already.
Are you sure?
Yes. You organize conferences. What are your conferences about?
I do. I organize something called the Low Carb Universe, which is, of course, a European version so that everyone gets access to similarly fantastic information as you guys have a lot in the States with, for example, Paleo FX, KetoCon, Low Carb San Diego, all of those things, Low Carb USA and the Denver one and all of these fantastic, and the Low Carb Cruise and all these places that I would love to attend every year, but it makes it a little bit difficult. But this is why we bring fantastic experts to Europe. And so that Europeans have a little bit easier of a time to get to that knowledge and to get to network with the similarly minded people. And we only serve 100% low carb real food. And we all stay in the same hotel. And it's all very nice and cozy. And we mix lectures with workshops. So every speaker has a lecture, but then they also have a workshop. So you can really dive into those questions that you really, really, really care about. Yeah, and we incorporate a lot of movement, but also time for reflection and taking it a bit easy, because I know how stressful an event like this can be when you are an attendee and you haven't organized it all.
So that's kind of cool. That's something I haven't experienced. So every speaker is then kind of required to do something cool with the audience afterwards, basically.
Yes, exactly.
So what would be an example of that? I haven't experienced that yet.
So for example, if a speaker knows that they get the same question a lot from their from their followers on social media or something, they can use that question or those questions and have sort of a question and answer sort of workshop. So it really becomes integrative. And last time we also had a doctor who has type 1 diabetes himself, who went through, how you handle insulin when you actually are taking down the amounts of carbs that you're eating. Or we could, there has been if someone's made a documentary, for example, they can show that for their workshop and stuff like that. So it's very, very, it's very interactive and it's very immersive, to put it that way.
Okay, that sounds awesome. I'm always interested on the logistics side of this kind of stuff. Like, what is the biggest challenge that you have when you're trying to figure out how to put an event like that on?
Who should come speak? Number one. Number two, how to price it. And number three, there's not really that many issues. It's just basically actually getting the word out is really difficult, especially for a sort of smaller event that maybe doesn't have that much of a following of its own. Then we do have to rely heavily on the speakers and previous guests to share a lot about it, which is always interesting.
So with speakers, you're kind of having to wade through people and figure out what their advice is like and make sure they're not out there preaching the wrong kind of...
sad.
Yeah, exactly. I would imagine that there's plenty of people out there that have been on the speaking circuit for 20 years or something like that, and they're still going to health conferences telling you it's okay to eat 20 pancakes as long as it's inside of your macros or something like that.
Exactly.
And they've been on the circuit for so long, and maybe they're in really good shape because they've managed to out exercise their bad diet, which is really hard, but I guess if you go ballistic, you can do it.
Yeah. Someone must be able to do it, right?
So have you come across somebody that you kind of were like, yeah, they're going to be a good speaker, and then you saw something that they posted or something that they did, and you're like, oh, nope, never mind, we got to get rid of them? Has that happened?
No, there's quite the rigorous research before we even ask them, just to avoid that. But yeah, I mean, this is where other conferences are fantastic. To do a bit of research and meet people and network and see what's happening in the real world and not just on social media. That's really cool.
Yeah, so I've definitely, with some of the other podcasts I'm involved in, before I get a guest on, researching them to figure out they're not, a bad actor or they're not a scammer or something like that. Like, yeah, that is most of what I'm doing when I'm in that process. So I was wondering, I don't know if that's a struggle that everybody has or if it's just me.
It is. But
so yeah, that's awesome. So you've gotten everybody to your event and you run them in Switzerland then, I imagine.
No, not at all.
Europe, but not Switzerland. Where do they go?
Yes, we have our events in Mallorca, Spain.
Oh, okay.
It's a little island in the Mediterranean and it's beautiful. It's such a gorgeous place that you can't miss it. It's so gorgeous.
I have not been there. Now I want to go. That reminds me, I tell people about the Azores all the time, where it's this little perfectly manicured island that's part of Portugal. Yeah. And that now has just moved up my list to a place that I want to go just from one suggestion. So is it always there or do you move it around?
It has been there this is the third time we're running it. Fourth event, but third time we're doing the main event. And yeah, it's been, that's the main event's home. We're trying to branch out a little bit, but it proves itself a little bit challenging.
You add all those logistical problems again once you start to do that. You mentioned the low carb cruise. I think that maybe the low carb Mediterranean cruise. Maybe you have to partner with, not even partner, make your own. Cruises are great.
Pretty much, yeah. We should do that.
They at least so I've run some conferences on cruises. So the Royal Caribbean, as long as you have, I think, like 20 people or something like that, will give you the conference room for free. And
really?
They've got a cool little setup for that. So depending on how long it is, it could be fun. I don't know.
Yeah, I've spoken on the low carb cruise a couple of times.
Oh, cool.
That was good fun.
Is that run by? Do they run that on Royal Caribbean or is it somebody else?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, they just happen to be. Another thing you can do just randomly. You can ask. Well, if you ever want to take cruise for free, go to Royal Caribbean and say, "Hey, I'm me, and I'll speak on your cruise as long as you give it to me for free." And then for like a 1 hour keynote, you get a free cruise. So I don't know. I don't know if that's something you'd be interested in, but I'm pretty sure. Yeah, they used to do that. I don't know if they still do, but it is Anyway, just something I randomly thought about.
Awesome.
So speaking of keynotes and speaking, like, what has been your favorite, outside of KetoCon? Because we talked about that and we talked nicely about them. So I don't want you to feel pressure to have to say them. What has been your favorite place that you've done a keynote or workshop or breakout session at?
Wow, that's a kind of a tough question. It's been so far in 4 languages across Europe and the States. But even though we've said very many nice things about KetoCon, I have to say KetoCon still. I mean, because if nothing else, the networking is unbeatable. I would love to check out more of the US conferences and be invited to more of them to speak. And no hints, nothing.
Hey, if you're listening, I don't know if you heard that cough, but that was a very subtle hint that you need to invite Hanna.
No, but I would love to see more. But so far, definitely KetoCon. It's also so nicely arranged for the speakers. Everything is recorded. Everything is handed to you. Basically, you have content for days afterwards. It's great.
Yeah, we actually did some of the content for them almost as we didn't do the speaker content, but we did a lot of the floor and the man on the street interviews or whatever you want to call them. So even though it was excluded from the choice, it still won first place was KetoCon. But
apart from my own, of course. God, I forgot that one.
Oh, yeah. What are you thinking? You said that you spoke in 4 different languages you've spoken in 4 different languages across different speaking engagements. I can only speak English and only at like a level of, I don't always feel comfortable on stage. 4 languages comfortable enough to speak on stage, that is astronomically crazy to me. What are the 4 languages, and is that just kind of how your upbringing was from Switzerland, or did you?
Not kidding.
Yeah.
No, I think how I can do it is basically because I'm so passionate about what I'm talking about, and I know my message needs to be heard by many, maybe not everyone, but many people. And that's what sort of drives me through the nerve-wracking sort of experience of standing there right outside of the stage and you're like, what the bleep am I doing with my life? Why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? And then I go on and I'm like, this is why I'm doing it, because it's awesome. But languages are English. I can speak English with a bit of help, clearly. Swedish, German, and Finnish.
Wow. So is there there's at least a little overlap between English and Spanish. It's the only other real language I have
I am learning Spanish,
Is there an overlap
actually.
there? Is there an overlap with those languages? Is it easier to learn Finnish if you already know Swedish? Or?
No, not at all.
No.
Not between those 2. Maybe if I were to learn Dutch, it would be easier for me now because I speak Swedish, English, and German, and sort of a mishmash of those 3 languages. But as I'm not, no, there's not much overlap.
So your English was absolutely impeccable from this particular interview talk that we've had. So I would have assumed it was maybe language number 2, not language number 4. So that was impressive. So that
Thanks.
Anyway. Like the nuance that you need to be able to speak in a language you have to be fluent in order to go on stage like that, especially if you get question and answers afterwards. So that's not as simple as going to Google Translate and reading something out on stage. You really have to know what you're doing. So
that's what I do with Spanish still. No, kidding. Haven't presented in Spanish, probably won't.
Yeah, well, if you do, let us know. We've got a great Spanish community down here also.
That's true, you do.
So I covered the coaching, the diabetes, your focus on keto, your writing, or no, your speaking. I have not covered your writing.
Nope.
So how many books have you written? 1 more?
Well, half, if that counts.
Oh, okay.
No, the writer part is more like I've written a lot of articles and was a very active blog writer before, but now I sort of moved into vlogging more because it's just more fun, really. And you can connect with people in a completely different way. But the writer thing is happening. It's just happening very slowly. So there is perhaps a manual of how to do diabetes properly coming up sometime soon.
Possibly maybe a manual sometime in the near future, and it's coming out in at least 4 languages.
Let's start with 1 and we can move on. Yes.
All right, 1 page a day. That's the trick that everybody talks about for writing. They're like, you just got to do 1 page every day, and then eventually you'll have your book. I don't know. I'm not writing a book, so I have no idea.
But it sounds like great advice.
Yeah. There's a service here called, I think, Scribed or Book in a Box or something like that, where you can pay $60,000. And they just ask you questions, and then they write your book for you.
Wow, that sounds terrible. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, if I ever wrote a book, that's what I would do, because I would never actually sit down and finish it. That would just be impossible for me. So, but yeah,
it is a challenge.
When you do take a book start to finish and write the whole thing yourself, that is what you've done. You've done $60,000 worth of value. There are people here paying for that. And you've done it all on your own. So that's
the question is, though, do you get those 60 grand back when you actually publish your book?
I doubt it. I know that they try to say that you do, but it is really hard to make money publishing a book as far as I'm concerned. So
you're not doing it for the cash, really.
Yeah, no, you're usually doing it just to you've got something you want to get out there, and if you ever happen to make enough money that it was worth your time, then that's amazing. So, but to make that kind of money, you almost need to be like a bestseller on the bestseller list. So that's tough. So I don't know. I don't want to knock those guys that are working for Book in a Box or anything like that, but I don't know that we're getting the investment back if we do that. But I'm sure they help with marketing or something similar.
They better.
Yeah. All right. So now that we're kind of basically towards the end of the episode here, is there anything that I kind of missed that you wanted to talk about today that I forgot to ask or anything like that?
No. Basically, I always say that everything is figure outable. And that even if you are in a really bad situation right now, with or without diabetes, but, well, my heart clearly speaks to those who are, who do live with diabetes, there's always a way to find what works for you. It doesn't have to be the same as works for me. Absolutely not. It can't be the same as works for your neighbor, your friend, or your dog, or whatever. You have to find what works for you. And if I, as a complete, I was a complete mess 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I wasn't sure I was going to see my 30th birthday, but if I can go from a double-digit HbA1c, so the average blood sugar measurements for the past sort of 3 months-ish, from a double-digit mess to a healthy, normal level of 5.0%, so can you.
That is a very great motivational piece there that would have got me excited if I was listening and I was on the fence. So
awesome.
That was great. Where can we follow you for more nuggets like that? Like, what is the best place to get the most from Hanna?
You can, of course, visit my webpage, which is hannaboethius.com. I'm sure you can link it somewhere. Or on social media, where I am Hanna Diabetes Expert, of course.
Okay. So you heard it here. Those links are in the show notes, too, if you're interested. So thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Possibly stateside, reach out to us. Ask us if we happen to be at that conference, and we will we'll link up if we're not or whatever. And definitely the next time you're in Austin.
Oh, awesome. We'll definitely do that.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
And just in case I forget, obviously Hanna nor me are any sort of medical professional. This is all for entertainment. Always do your own research on this stuff. Ask a medical professional before making any changes in your own diet.